jump right in, and if we start at the beginning, what is the first thing that you would do with a new client? So when someone first contacts you, how do you assess where they're at, and then what you're going to do next for like a game plan?
Yes. With new clients, usually the first thing I'm always looking at is what is their goal? Where is their current? Because I mainly deal with physique competitors, so it's usually setting out the timeline and reverse engineering based off of where they want to be. Because at least with physique competitors, it's such a long-term goal. For a lot of them, it's like, hey, I want a pro card, I want to compete in the pro stage, or maybe they're pros and they want this Olympia level physique. So it's like, all right, what is the goal? And then have to work backwards to what the current physique is and set out a timeline. And then that timeline kind of dictates how I'm communicating those expectations to the client. Because when someone comes like, hey, I want a pro card this year, it's like, okay, this might be a 3 or 4 year journey. Like, what? They're not ready for that. So I think as a coach, setting the expectations out the gate really helps keep your coaching at a level to where you're not going to have, let the client down, or even let yourself down as a coach, to where they know kind of along the way what that process should actually look like. So those are some of the first things: setting out the timeline, with aligning their goals with where their current physique is, and so you have clear expectations, and that kind of dictates the whole plan from there.
And then would you have within that kind of like a feeler kind of week or two where you're just getting to understand them as a new client, getting to understand how their body is like adapting to the things you're implementing?
Yeah, at least from there, I think having like an exploratory call, especially if you're to establish I think the face-to-face piece, even if it's just 15 minutes, you can gauge a lot about where someone is. I think maturity-wise, as what they can implement, but also as like the other aspects around what they can do with how they explain like their current plan or even their training of what maybe they know education-wise, to see how maybe an estimate of how fast they're going to be able to progress or where you even need to start the plan at. But then, yeah, after that first week, you kind of just have to get rolling. So it's always looking at what their current plan was. So you need a good assessment of what they were currently doing. And make those changes. Sometimes it's not a lot of changes. Don't feel like I've sent plans back to clients and they're relatively the same of what they were doing. Like my diet's not completely switched. It was like, well, this was like a reasonable setup, but a lot of the value in coaching is the changes you make along the way. So a lot of times you need to sit with a client and see how they respond over that week, make the changes from there, and then that's when the plan really will get personalized towards them. And of course, like, I talked about, you set out a timeline for someone, but you have to see how they respond, because you might have a good maybe estimate of what the timeline looks like. Like, hey, you need a diet for 20 weeks, and you're like, oh, this is a really slow response or a fast response. And that kind of changes the plan along the way. So we have a tentative timeline laid out, but then of course it's adaptive as we see like those responses. And if you're watching someone pretty close, you should know fairly quickly what that is.
And I guess that kind of, I do have questions, but I'm kind of going off slightly now. But I guess when that happens, that's why it's so important in the beginning. Let's say you're doing a prep as an example, that you do allow that time with a client for those changes that you might have to adapt to in the first few weeks.
Yeah, I think that's for one, it was a mistake I made in the beginning, because in the beginning coaching, you just want clients. Like, you want as many clients as you can get, and you end up taking clients into situations that they weren't ready for, and when really you need to be okay giving them the answer that they really need, and you might have a client walk away, but the worst case is taking on this client and the outcome is so poor, that's not even a client that's where you're going to have good referrals off of either. So if you take on a client that jumps like, hey, I'm 16 weeks out, let's go. Okay, let's do it. And then you see the client, they're like, they weren't really 16 weeks out. And also their whole environment around wasn't set up for a contest prep. Psychologically, financially, emotionally, maybe even physically, all those aspects need to be considered. So with the client, I don't ever take them on as just purely prep anymore. there's always a pre-prep phase that's just required now. So, at least this 2 to 4 week period of, hey, we need to be on this plan before we commit into a prep. And then once you see, for one, you'll gain that lag time of learning the client and what's working, what's not, and also even if they're even ready to do a prep. Then go into a prep from there. So I know that's has a potential to shut you off of income as like a coach, but at the same time, it has the long-term potential of growing you more because you're going to be doing what's right for people.
For sure. Okay. So I'll go back to the questions now, John. For a client, for every client, is there an essential supplement or essential foods, or are there specific things that you add for every client regardless, or is it always just based on the individual?
I mean, I guess the the scapegoat answer is always like, it's all, based on the individual and everybody's different. And that's nice, but you have to actually know what to do with people. So yeah, it is goal dependent. It's of course needs based with anything you're going to implement. But as humans, we know we have some essential things that should be in place. And at least, dietary wise, my background's a dietitian, right? So I'm always like food first, and that is what I believe makes a truly encompassing diet. And if you want to like quote a healthy diet, and supplements are that, they supplement the diet. So a good diet, I feel like we should be trying to encompass macros, but also all your micronutrients as well, your vitamins, your minerals, phytonutrients. So I try to build that out to get as comprehensive as I can. So I think an app like yours, like Kahuna's, where you can see all the micronutrient breakdown when you're plugging in these foods of what you can cover with that individual. The areas that you can't cover are the ones that we should be plugging in for supplementation. That is where you're fitting in what is essential. And those are like the essential items, the micronutrients. So for situations where you're moving into like contest prep where the food won't be enough, that's when you would see like you might cover someone with the multivitamin just as I think there's a pretty benign risk there, and just kind of fill in the gaps. So in those instances, I would use like a multivitamin. But in off season, when I know food is plentiful and I see that in what I've plugged into the diet, I won't think a vitamin is necessary, except just individual ones that would be common, which a lot of times vitamin D is a big one for clients that I'll come across. Sometimes it's magnesium. I'll have some bodybuilders that just hate eating fruit. And so that's an instance where like vitamin C might be in place. Other common ones, zinc for females, iron, and that's dependent on if they're, having a menstrual cycle or not. Then beyond that would be pretty comprehensive, except with the exception of like omega-3. And that's what I have everybody on, because most people aren't eating enough fish every single day to cover that. So that's in general is how I would go about it. But I am the different bodybuilders. I try to be pretty encompassing with fruits and vegetables. Most of us don't eat that. Like I did the diet that was just chicken and rice, and you don't have room to fit in vegetables. So I try to get 4 to 5 servings of a variety of fruits and vegetables per day. If you do that, man, that's going to cover quite a bit of those essential items that you need for fiber and the micronutrients.
Okay, cool. What mistakes are you seeing with online coaches specifically for training programs? So when people are creating that training program for their client, what are general mistakes that you might find in those initial plans that they're creating?
Yeah, I think over or underestimating the ability of the client and making assumptions around that. So, and what I mean by that is you have a client come and they, hey, I want to bring up my arms or my back or whatever it may be. And you're like, oh yeah, here's my back program, do this. And it's based on a lot of assumption that client online is going to be able to do those exercises and execute them how you have in your head that they're going to be doing them, which can make far differently like the effectiveness of the sets that you're doing, the volume that you're doing. So it's important to get a good assessment of what is the client's ability to even do these exercises, which should come through your assessment of what's their current program and volume level, then I like to ask for just 3 to 4 videos of like the big compound lifts you might see in that program, right? If they're doing a squat or a bench press, like just ask to see the work set, 20 seconds. And I know coaches are like, I can't watch all this training footage. It's like, I don't even ask for that much. Like, a minute of your life, 4 sets, 15 seconds each of the last kind of final reps and that's enough to know off the bat of like, what's this ability of the client to execute a complicated movement? What is that training effort level of theirs? If you see like, oh wow, this guy's like has really good form, he can take a set like really far to failure and not have form break down. This is a more advanced level client, and they can handle like maybe the same level of volume that you see in their program, or maybe it's someone that's really goes beyond failure. You need to scale them back. Now the opposite might be, so you see someone where their form is horrendous, right? And they're like, yeah, set to failure. And it's like, that was like not even close. You're like, okay, this is someone where you need to just probably keep volume the same still, but work really hard on their execution. But those 2 clients, if I gave them the same bring up the back program, it's going to be maybe far less effective, far more effective for one, or just inappropriate too. Like you might have someone doing a lift that they just have no business doing as of yet. So I think for online coaching, our limitations, we're just not there in person. So bridging the gap to where you can see like some type of level of video footage and be able to critique that individual. Because I used to do the coaching without the videos, and I'm like, what's going on here? Like until I finally do it, that's like the aha moments, right? That you have clients, and you're building a ton of value. Because I'll tell you, most coaches aren't doing that are out there.
And how do you, so John, if someone sends you a video and their form isn't quite how you'd want it to be, how do you then address that with them? Would you just give them pointers, or would you ask them to like go and see another coach? Like presumably you're not going to tell them to go and get help elsewhere to figure out the form.
Yeah, sure. So with what I'll do is have them put all their videos in a folder, and I can go through and leave comments on those videos. So if I'm using Drive or maybe Kahunas, you can do this as well. And so it depends on the level of the client. Some things are easy critiques, like, hey, just scoot over on the bench a few inches. Like that's enough. That's all you need to do. That's a quick comment to leave. If something's really vastly different, I might move that client just to a new exercise so they can do something right away to be proficient, but then put in another exercise to where we can have some learning ability and progress it up. But that might be when I need to do like a video showing that explanation. So I might have them pulled up on the screen, like doing like a loom, and where I can point out and show, so they can learn and see like the corrections if there's that many to make. Or it might be me needing to send them a video of actually visualizing it too. But usually just based off of walking them through is enough to get it really cleaned up by the next time I see it. And then I might have like one more video review and I'll have it locked down. Then we can just move past and move on to the next exercise from there.
Awesome.
Cool. And I would say because if people think like, how do you review so much training footage? And I realize their time's valuable. So I ask clients I'll start with their main lifts and 2 exercises per workout. So say they train 4 days a week. On their check-in day, I'm going to have 8 videos to review that are like 20 seconds long. And so I can work through those 8 exercises. Some might be good. Some might need a second review. Once we check those off, we move to their next exercises. So by the end of like 4 to 6 weeks, like we've gone proficiently through everything. We're not going to need to review video footage like all the time, but at least in that initial client, we can and set them up correctly.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. So changing direction entirely here. What are your thoughts on moving away from the traditional kind of carb loading pre-show to fat loading instead? Like, and why would someone think that there's benefits in that versus carbs? Like, what's the rationale behind it, and do you think it's effective?
Yeah. So there's some people doing a little bit of both, and the thought around this came from some data looking at fat loading and a lot of this comes from endurance athletes. So we actually don't have a lot of information in like bodybuilders. They're starting to get more studies out on it, but a lot of it is from endurance athletes, and using like a very high fat intake approach, you do store fatty acids within the muscle. So there is a certain level of of intramuscular triglyceride. And it's shown, like, if you go really high in fat, you will replenish these stores. If you were on a plan where you were like sufficiently suppressed and low calorie depleted. The thing with fat loading though is that it's not a huge volume. So unlike carbohydrate, you're not storing a certain amount of water along with a certain amount of carb. It doesn't have that same impact. So you might have this, I think it's like 1 to 2% of the muscle is intramuscular triglyceride. So if you think about it, it's not going to be this huge dramatic impact, while 2/3 of the muscle is composed of water, and a lot of that being attached to glycogen. So carbohydrates vastly have the most impact on increasing muscle volume if doing a carbohydrate load. And so the idea was is that you would like maybe fat load in the beginning of the week to bring up intramuscular triglyceride, then you would carb load to fill up carbohydrate, then you'd be fully loaded, right, with carbs and fats, right. which is a theoretical approach. So we don't have data that doing that is going to inherently improve someone's physique. We have some initial study looking at just carbohydrate loading, and pretty good to say, like in studies, like, yeah, this makes an impactful look. Whether you do good on stage is kind of different, because you can look at like, oh yeah, the muscle was bigger, the skin fold was smaller, but visually that subjective gauge, like, did that make someone actually place better? Hard to say. Doesn't matter about the studies, because anecdotally we've been doing this for years and know like a level of carbohydrate loading makes a difference. Sure. I would say with carbohydrate loading, you're also having an influx of calories, and intramuscular triglyceride is going to raise up some also. Right. Why they keep it separate is because high fats while carbohydrate loading kind of impede the carbohydrate load. They're like, oh, we could separately. The issue that I have with implementing it is predictability and also GI distress. So some of these protocols of fat loading early in the week are like over 100, 150 grams of fats, and it's coming from being very low fat. So it's kind of a GI distress. Then you go to this huge carb load because you're going to have less days to do it, which comes with its own problems. So I like to do a linear carb load with my athletes. So we'll have kind of their baseline of fats, and every day we are just incrementally bringing up carbohydrate, and every day we're looking across pictures from morning, midday to night to see where we find their best look. And sure. That way, like, you'll know, like, all right, when they come up 4 pounds, they look full and hard. This is exactly how they can walk on stage. And then every day we're trying to just kind of emulate that, repeat that until we are at show day. We know exactly what to do. There's no guesswork. With the other approaches, it gives a large degree of predictability, because you have a fat load, that's not going to be the stage look at all. You have a carb load where they're probably going to reach a point of like almost spilling over and too soft, and then you need to bring them back down and tighten them back up. So it might be the one day before the show, you might say, like, I think this will be the look, but they might keep moving and keep getting depleted. So it's hard to have that consistency with that approach. However, some guys are really good at it. So it's not that there's not a reason that you might not use that approach, but it definitely takes someone that's very experienced to do it. And I would say anecdotally, off what I see, it's not a vast improvement. And a lot of times guys are missing the mark because they're manipulating way too many variables. If you're like loading carbohydrates extremely rapidly, also on show day, a lot of people like have to go to get their tanning done. They're now sitting around in a hotel room. They're going to wake up earlier on show day. You have an environment that's changing the variables as well, but also you're now moving carbohydrates and sodium, and it makes it very hard to nail someone on show day versus only pulling like one lever at a time and being able to have some consistency in that. So that's the long answer. That's the short and long answer of why I wouldn't necessarily do fat loading. I will say I bring in more fats if the carbohydrate load is getting to a volume level where it's a little bit too much digestion-wise, and also I see that client is starting to drop weight every single day. Beyond I'm able to give them in carbohydrates, that's just something more calorically dense helps the carbohydrate load just stick a little bit more with them. So that's how I go about it.
And so with something like that and having a higher margin of room for error, like, that can lead to mistakes. So I'm interested to know, in the beginning, when you started out, before you became IFBB Pro, John Jewett on the Olympia stage, what mistakes did you make in the beginning that in hindsight you would have done differently?
Yeah, so I went through the extremes. So like in off seasons, I wanted to like lean gain, and I was undershot calories a lot. And so that would lead me to where the next year I ended up being the same stage weight. And that was discouraging. Right. It wasn't like you were like better and leaner. It's like I just didn't make that much progress. Then I had another off season where I was like, I'm just going to get huge and just eat and eat and eat. And I drove up the scale. I think I got up to like 230, and I had a diet all the way down to like 185. So it was nearly 50 pounds off. And through that much dieting, I also don't think I gained much muscle tissue. So, it's swinging from these extremes. So the hard part is like, at least for off season, is making sure you're giving someone enough to have muscle gain occur, but also having positions where you're mitigating fat gain as well. And a lot of those seasons were a one phase of off season. And what I mean by that, there was only push food. There was never anything between. And so that's where now, like in J3U, what I teach is the off season is a multi-phase muscle gain approach. So you have phases where you're pushing food up. PDs might be pushed up if you're enhanced. Training volume might be rising. We only can sustain that for so long before we have red flags that we need to pull back. And you might have a holding phase where we have something at maintenance to be able to retain that tissue that's held on. Because I do believe you need to sit at a body weight to retain it for a period of time. You also have something that might like GI distress, like, man, I'm getting nauseous eating my meals. Like, this is red flag. Like, you might just need to bring down to maintenance and hold there as well. You might have accumulated so much body fat over an off season to not leave gains on the table, right? That you need to wash off some body fat. You need a mini cut fat loss phase to regain your runway in the off season. So those are like the three components of an off season of pushing, holding / maintenance, fat loss. Those are outside of even contest prep. But once I implemented something more like that, and knowing when to bring up food, when to bring down food, and not just chasing the scale, that's when I've made the best progress of progressing muscle, but also mitigating fat gain as well. I'd say within a contest prep scenario, some of the mistakes that I just didn't even recognize the link of all the variables together. So like when I was getting coached, it was like, all right, coach, I follow the diet. I did my training. I trained really hard. I did the cardio, and I'm not seeing quite the result. I'm not losing fat. Like, why is my weight going up this week? And like, oh, you're cheating on the plan. Like, I'm not cheating on the plan. I would say sleep and stress management were so underrated, and I didn't have great tools to really gauge those in clients either. And I don't think clients really realize it, because we enter into contest prep as like, all right, let's start it up. I'll fit it all in. And what suffers is sleep. So it's like, yeah, I was working this job, and now I'm doing double cardio, and well, I'll just sleep a few hours less. And you see someone that the ratio of fat that they're losing is lessened. And also they're accumulating more fatigue, which that more fatigue is making them hungrier. It's making everything they do on prep feel even harder, to where now it's fatigue that's limiting your ability to drive the deficit to get them stage lean. So fatigue management was huge. And that's what if I go back, would have done. It was in prep, setting up timeline that overestimates someone's body fat, and then fatigue management. If you do those things well, you will nail people on stage. And so you need tools that can help truly assess someone's like level of fatigue, and also coach them to improve those areas as well. Like, what should you be doing with stress management, or what should your really lifestyle and routine look like to give you the best opportunity to bring your best physique to stage? So I would go back and correct all those things in my past. But now this is what it came about. That is, I've done all the mistakes, and I had to ask, well, why is this happening? How does this work? And find those answers to just be better for myself. And through that is why we have J3 University, to help you just be the best version of your coach that you can be, and not have so much room for error that I had when I started coaching to deliver those results for your clients. And so that's what we have. We have from nutrition, training, PDs, all the way into how do you manage all across your contest prep, post-show, off-season, all laid out so you can learn and implement it with your clients at a higher level.
And to date, I think there's been over 1,000 students now gone through J3U in some capacity.
Yeah.
And for anyone looking to do it, it's incredible. It gives you, like you can see on the website, it has full details of what's available in every single module. And from start to finish, it would take, about 90 days, John, for someone to, if they were doing it every day, like going through every module, about 90 days?
Yeah, yes, and you could actually even do it faster. I've had some people really go fast, but they would be those that also didn't have anything else going on. Like I actually go through it in 3 weeks, which is incredible. It's doing like multiple lectures a day, but yeah, in general, I'd say 90 days is a good time frame to lay out for anyone. And you also, like, if you need to go slower, you have lifetime access to the material. So anything that I update within J3U, which I do, you'll have access to those. Also, if there's something beyond what you cover in a lecture that you want a little deeper, I'm there along with my other educator, Luke Miller, to answer your questions in the forum. And we go way in depth on as far as you want to go to. And if you enjoy these live streams, we'll do one every week too. So you can have the opportunity to ask us questions directly.